This is the Penn Mary and Canton Railroad Yard on my Monument City Terminal Division layout before I put the backdrop photo up. This is that same area afterward. Before the backdrop, after the backdrop. Before, after. Before, after. Before, after. You get the idea. Even if it's just a board painted sky blue, a backdrop goes a long way towards making your layout look more realistic. And a photo backdrop can make it even more realistic, especially if you only have limited space. Hi everybody, I'm Joe Parker of the Pixel Depot, where we give model railroaders the knowledge, tools, and services they need to build a realistic layout and the motivation to work on it right now. For me, a backdrop is absolutely essential on a layout. As I've said before, nothing ruins the illusion we're trying to create quicker than being able to see a concrete wall or paneling or a window or other people on the other side of the layout. You may disagree, and we can argue about that later, but I'm right. If you happen to have tracks laid very close to the backdrop, it can especially help your realism to use a photo backdrop of some kind. This helps disguise the seam so it doesn't look like the sky is touching the surface of your layout. There are plenty of photo backdrops available out there, but I looked around and I didn't really find any that really satisfied me. I'm modeling Baltimore in the summertime, and along South Newkirk Street, which parallels the yard, there's a lot of overgrowth. I thought that making a backdrop photo of this overgrowth, even if it wasn't exactly prototypical, would be better than a commercial backdrop. In 2019, before the world shut down, I'd gone to Baltimore to take photos, so I made sure to get photos of all this growth beside the street. This also had the benefit of including the trash, junk, rocks, fencing, and discarded wheels that were there too. I then spent some time chopping those photos up in Photoshop, moving them around, layering them, and blending them until I was satisfied. I decided on a height of 4 inches for the backdrop photo after doing some experiments to see what looked right. You may even remember me posting a test photo here on YouTube a while back. To create this backdrop photo, I used essentially the same concepts as I did in the video about the backdrop for the grunge, although on steroids for this one. As you can see here on the right end of the backdrop as I'm playing with it in Photoshop, some of those levels have weird erase marks and other effects to blend the pieces together. You have to do these kind of things to get it to look like you want. And it really is a process of trial and error. The result was a photo that was 4 inches tall and 145 inches long. Yes, you heard me right. The photo was just over 12 feet long, and that's because that was the length of the wall I was putting it on. Now that's a lot of photos combined together in a lot of layers. 37 layers, in fact. But I think the result speaks for itself. And I know this isn't something everyone wants to try, but if you're looking for a custom backdrop, reach out to me. It is a service that I provide. Now, I also didn't want to go to a commercial printer for this, so I decided to print it myself. I knew that I was going to be adding water-based scenery, including ballast, to the front of this, which meant that I needed to avoid the typical paper-based products which would just soak up the water and distort them. After some research, I discovered a site called sheetlabels.com, and they offered vinyl laser weatherproof material. Furthermore, they offered it in 8.5 by 11 sheets with 2 4.25 by 11 labels on each sheet. Now, since my backdrop was only going to be 4 inches tall, this would allow me to double up and print part of the backdrop on the top and bottom of the sheet, meaning there would be very little waste and I'd be able to save money. After a couple of misfires, I got all the sheets printed, and I'm not going to lie, there were a lot of them. Enough of them, in fact, that I made sure to number them so I wouldn't forget what order they were supposed to go in on the wall. Then I needed to remove the sky from my photos since my wall is already painted blue, and I knew that the blue on the sheet wasn't going to be a match to that paint. So I used a set of scissors I got years ago at a craft store that has an irregular pattern to the cut, like a pinking shear but less regular. This allows you to take some shortcuts when cutting the sky off. I'll put a link to a similar product in the description below. I would then follow up with some decal scissors to take off any bits that I thought looked out of place. So I started cutting the pieces out. And cutting, and cutting, and cutting. This really is the most tedious part of the whole thing. The only other real drawback I can think of doing things this way is that you end up with a lot of these little bits of tree graffiti, I guess is what I'd call it. Just little chunks of label that come off when you're cutting the sheets with the craft scissors. When I was finished, I used a green marker to cover the white edge on the labels and blend some colors together. Because I needed to slide the label down below the surface of the layout, I needed to make sure that it wouldn't stick to the wall until I got it placed correctly. So I scored the back of the sheet, and that bottom half inch or so kept its non-adhesive backing, and that allowed me to put it in place without it sticking. After that, it was just a matter of peeling the backing off and placing each sheet. You can see the mark I put on the wall so I could line up the bottom of each printed sheet. Now I'd printed the sheets so that there was a 1/4 inch of overlap on all the printouts, so the seams between the sheets would be less obvious that way. To remove any bubbles, smooth the sheets down, and make sure I got the whole sheet adhered, I used a 3M vinyl wrap tool. You could also use a credit card or other similar item, but the 3M tool is made of rubber and it's less likely to damage the print than those other things are. I'll put a link to that in the description below as well. From here, it was just a matter of rinse and repeat. This time lapse shows the entire process of installing the labels from end to end. After all the labels were attached, I went back and covered any obvious white marks with either a black or green marker. Now, the last thing I did was add a couple of 3-dimensional adhesive trees I found at Michael's to a couple of the areas. I'll add a couple more when the ballasting is complete. This just gives the backdrop some added depth here and there. To me, the difference is like night and day. I was able to get a completely custom 12-foot backdrop for about the same cost as a single short length of commercial backdrop. So maybe give a photo backdrop a try. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'm Joe Parker of the Pixel Depot. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll meet me next time in the train room.